I never thought a shipping container would turn my peaceful suburban life into a legal nightmare that would eventually involve armed deputies, frantic phone calls at 3 in the morning, and a complete upheaval of our homeowners association. But there I was on a freezing Tuesday morning in January 2025, staring at the empty spot in my driveway where my storage container used to be. My name is Marcus Emerson, and I had lived in the Pleasant Ridge subdivision of Franklin County, Ohio, for the past 6 years. The neighborhood was one of those cookie-cutter developments where every house looked vaguely similar, with neat lawns and two-car garages. I worked as a civilian logistics coordinator for the Franklin County Sheriff's Department, a job that sounded way more exciting than it actually was. Most days, I shuffled paperwork, managed equipment inventories, and coordinated storage for various department assets. When Sheriff's Deputy Tom Richardson approached me back in November about storing some overflow equipment during the winter months, I didn't think twice about it. The department's main storage facility was undergoing renovations, and they needed temporary space for non-critical but expensive equipment that couldn't just sit in a regular warehouse due to security protocols. Tom and I had been friends since high school, and he knew I had a large driveway and a quiet life. The arrangement was simple. They would provide a secure shipping container. I would let it sit on my property for 3 to 4 months, and I would receive a modest monthly stipend from the county for the space rental. The container arrived in mid-November, a nondescript gray metal box about 20 feet long. The delivery truck placed it along the side of my driveway, not blocking anything, just sitting there quietly. Tom and 2 other deputies loaded it with what he described as backup tactical gear, old riot shields, some outdated communication equipment that still had value, and various other items that needed climate-controlled storage but weren't urgent enough for prime facility space. Everything was documented. I had a contract with the county. I had receipts. I had emails. The container had county markings on it, though they were subtle, just a small identification number that wouldn't mean anything to a casual observer. What I hadn't counted on was Brenda Patterson. Brenda was the president of the Pleasant Ridge HOA, a position she treated like a divine appointment. She was in her early 50s, with that particular haircut that seems to be standard issue for certain middle-aged women in positions of minor authority. Shoulder-length blonde hair with aggressive highlights. She drove a white Lexus SUV and had opinions about everything, especially things that were absolutely none of her business. I had received a notice in my mailbox 3 days after the container arrived. It was printed on official HOA letterhead, with several paragraphs of dense text explaining that storage containers were not permitted on residential properties, per Section 14.7 of the Community Guidelines. I needed to remove it within 30 days or face fines. I had immediately called the HOA office and explained the situation to Karen Winters, the vice president. Yes, another Karen. The universe has a sense of humor. I told her it was a temporary arrangement with the county, that it would be gone by March, and that I had all the documentation to prove it was official government business. Karen had sounded sympathetic on the phone. She said she would talk to Brenda and the board, and that she was sure they could work something out given the circumstances. I felt relieved and went about my life, assuming reasonable people would reach a reasonable conclusion. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I received another notice. This one informed me that my request for an exception had been denied. The board had voted unanimously, the letter claimed, and I was now accruing fines of $100 per day until the container was removed. I was also threatened with legal action if I didn't comply within 10 days. I called the HOA office again. This time I got Brenda herself. "Mr. Emerson," she said in that clipped, self-satisfied tone that immediately made my blood pressure spike. "The rules are quite clear. No commercial vehicles, no storage containers, no temporary structures. This is a residential community with standards." "It's not a commercial vehicle," I explained, trying to keep my voice level. "It's county property, sheriff's department property. It's here for security reasons and it will be gone in a few months." "If it's not a vehicle registered to you and parked in your driveway for residential purposes, then it's in violation," she said. "The board has discussed this matter extensively and our position is firm." "Did you even look at the documentation I submitted?" "We looked at everything." "The rules don't have exceptions for government equipment, Mr. Emerson. Everyone has to follow the same guidelines. If we let you keep a storage container, then everyone will want one. You understand? This isn't about me wanting to store my Christmas decorations, Brenda. This is official county business. I have a contract. And I have community standards to maintain," she replied. "Your contract with the county doesn't supersede our HOA regulations. You agreed to those regulations when you purchased your home. Now please remove the container or we will be forced to take further action." She hung up before I could respond. I contacted Tom Richardson and explained the situation. He was baffled. "They can't just demand we remove county property," Tom said. "That's insane. Let me talk to our legal department." Over the next few weeks, there was a flurry of communication. The county's legal team sent letters to the HOA explaining that the equipment was part of an official agreement, that it posed no danger or nuisance to the community, and that forcing its removal could interfere with county operations. The HOA responded with their own lawyers, citing property law, HOA authority, and covenant enforcement. Meanwhile, my fines were supposedly accumulating. I received weekly notices informing me that I now owed thousands of dollars in violation penalties. I ignored them, figuring the county's legal team would eventually wear them down. Then came Christmas and New Year's. I went to visit my sister in Pennsylvania for 10 days over the holidays. When I left, the container was sitting peacefully in my driveway, minding its own business, full of sheriff's department equipment. When I returned on January 7th, it was gone. I stood in my driveway at 8 in the morning, my suitcase still in my hand, staring at the empty space where a 20-foot shipping container used to be. There were scrape marks on the concrete where it had been dragged or lifted. Otherwise, no evidence it had ever existed. I dropped my suitcase and pulled out my phone, calling Tom Richardson immediately. "Tom, the container is gone." "What do you mean gone?" "I mean not here. Vanished. Someone took it." There was a pause. "Marcus, that container has about $40,000 worth of equipment in it." "Are you telling me someone stole county property?" "I'm telling you it's not in my driveway anymore. I just got back from my sister's and it's gone." "Don't touch anything. I'm coming over right now." Tom arrived 20 minutes later in his patrol car, along with another deputy named Sarah Chen. They examined my driveway, took photos of the scrape marks, and asked me a dozen questions about when I left, when I returned, and if I had seen anything suspicious. "Did you give anyone permission to move it?" Tom asked. "Of course not. I was in Pennsylvania. I didn't even know it was missing until 20 minutes ago." Could the HOA have taken it? I felt something cold settle in my stomach. They've been threatening me for weeks, but I didn't think they would actually do anything. Can they even do that legally? "No," Tom said flatly. "This is theft of government property. This just became a serious criminal matter." Sarah was on her phone, presumably calling the sheriff's office to report the theft. Tom walked around my property, looking for any signs of forced entry or damage, though there was nothing to see. The container had simply been removed. "Check your mailbox," Tom suggested. "If they did this, they probably left some kind of notice." I walked to my mailbox at the end of the driveway and opened it. Inside was a bright yellow flyer that made my hands shake with anger. "Property removed by order of Pleasant Ridge HOA per Community Guidelines Section 14.7. The storage container located at 2847 Maple Grove Drive has been removed due to continued violation of community standards. The property owner has been assessed all removal costs plus accumulated fines totaling $8,750. Payment is due within 30 days. "They took it," I said, walking back to Tom and handing him the flyer. "The HOA took it." Tom's expression went from concern to furious as he read the notice. "They removed county property. They removed sheriff's department equipment." He looked at Sarah. "Call the captain. Tell him we need authorization for immediate action and get me the address for the HOA office." What followed was the fastest escalation I had ever seen. Within an hour, there were 4 patrol cars in my driveway. Captain Michael Rodriguez arrived, a stern-looking man in his 50s who did not look happy. He read the HOA notice, asked me several questions about the arrangement and the previous communications, and then made a phone call that I couldn't quite hear. "Mr. Emerson," Captain Rodriguez said, "we need you to come with us to the HOA office. We're going to recover our equipment, and we need you to provide identification and documentation." The Pleasant Ridge HOA office was located in a small brick building near the community entrance, sharing space with a real estate office. We arrived in a convoy, 4 patrol cars and my personal vehicle. It was extremely intimidating, exactly as intended. Brenda Patterson was inside, sitting at her desk, and her face went pale when she saw the deputies walking through the door. "Brenda Patterson?" Captain Rodriguez asked. "Yes." "I'm Captain Rodriguez with the Franklin County Sheriff's Department. We're here about a storage container that was removed from Marcus Emerson's property without authorization. That container belongs to the county and contains department equipment." "Where is it?" Brenda's mouth opened and closed. "It was removed per HOA regulations. Mr. Emerson was in violation of community standards and refused to comply with multiple notices. Madam, that container is county property. The equipment inside is valued at approximately $40,000 and is part of official law enforcement operations. By removing it without authorization from the county, you've committed theft of government property. Now I'm going to ask you one more time. Where is the container?" "We have the right to enforce our community standards," Brenda said, but her voice was shaking. "We followed proper procedures. We gave him multiple notices and opportunities to comply." "You do not have the right to remove government property," Captain Rodriguez said. His voice was calm but had an edge that made everyone in the room nervous. "Your HOA authority does not extend to seizing county assets. Now, where is our equipment?" Karen Winters, the vice president, was sitting at another desk looking like she wanted to disappear into the floor. "It's at Miller's storage on Route 33, she said quietly. "We hired a moving company to transport it yesterday." "Which moving company?" "Atlas Moving and Storage." Captain Rodriguez gestured to one of the deputies, who immediately got on the radio. "And you have access to this storage unit. The HOA has the keys," Karen said. "We were holding the container until Mr. Emerson paid his fines and removal costs." "You were holding stolen property for ransom," Tom Richardson said. He looked angrier than I had ever seen him. Brenda stood up, her face flushed. Now wait just a minute. We did not steal anything. We enforced community regulations that Mr. Emerson agreed to when he purchased his home. We have every right to remove violations from the property. Not when that violation is official county equipment placed there under a legal contract, Captain Rodriguez said. Get the keys. You're going to take us to that storage facility right now, and we're going to recover our property. Then we're going to have a conversation about the legal consequences of what you've done. 20 minutes later, we were at Miller's Storage, a sprawling facility of identical metal garages on the outskirts of Franklin County. Brenda, looking increasingly distressed, led us to Unit 47. She unlocked it with shaking hands, and there was the container, sitting inside the climate-controlled garage. Tom and Sarah immediately began checking the container's locks and seals. The county locks had been cut off and replaced with standard padlocks. "You cut the locks," Tom said. "You cut county security locks and replaced them with your own." "We had to access the unit to move it," Brenda said weakly. "Did you open the container itself?" "No, of course not." "You better hope that's true," Captain Rodriguez said. "Because if any equipment is missing or damaged, you're looking at felony theft charges." They brought in a flatbed truck from the department's motor pool, and over the next hour, the container was loaded and transported back to the sheriff's facility. Tom and another deputy did a complete inventory of the contents while Brenda and Karen waited, looking increasingly miserable. Finally, Tom emerged from the container with a clipboard. "Everything's here," he said to Captain Rodriguez. "Nothing appears to be damaged, though some items were shifted around during transport." Captain Rodriguez nodded and turned to Brenda. "Mrs. Patterson, you're under arrest for theft of government property." "What? You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. You removed county property without authorization. You held it in an undisclosed location. You cut county security devices, and you attempted to extort payment in exchange for its return. Those are crimes." "I want a lawyer," Brenda said, her voice rising. "This is ridiculous." "I was enforcing HOA regulations." "You can call your lawyer from the station," Captain Rodriguez said, nodding to one of the deputies, who stepped forward with handcuffs. Watching Brenda Patterson being read her Miranda rights in the parking lot of a storage facility was surreal. Karen Winters was crying quietly, repeating that she had tried to tell Brenda this was a bad idea, that they should have just worked out a compromise with me. "Am I being arrested too?" Karen asked nervously. "Not at this time," Captain Rodriguez said. "But we'll need a full statement from you about the decision-making process, who authorized what, and your role in this situation." "I voted against it," Karen said quickly. "When Brenda proposed removing the container, I said we should wait and keep negotiating. But she convinced the other board members that we had to enforce the rules strictly or set a bad precedent." "Who else was involved in the decision?" "The whole board. There are 5 of us. Brenda, myself, Robert Chen, Linda Martinez, and Douglas Freeman." "We'll need to talk to all of them," Captain Rodriguez said. Over the next several days, the situation exploded into a full-blown scandal that consumed the Pleasant Ridge community. The story made the local news. HOA president arrested for seizing sheriff's equipment. Reporters showed up in our subdivision, interviewing neighbors and filming stand-ups in front of Brenda's house. The reactions were mixed. Some neighbors thought Brenda had gone too far and that the HOA had overstepped its authority. Others believed the rules were the rules, and that I should have removed the container when first asked, regardless of it being county property. A few people thought the whole thing was blown out of proportion and that criminal charges were excessive. I received dozens of calls and messages. Some were supportive, thanking me for standing up to the HOA's heavy-handed tactics. Others accused me of causing trouble and making the neighborhood look bad. One particularly nasty, anonymous letter suggested I should move somewhere else if I couldn't respect community standards. The legal process moved forward with surprising speed. Brenda hired an expensive defense attorney who immediately began arguing that she had acted in good faith based on HOA authority and had no criminal intent. The county prosecutor's office disagreed strongly, pointing out that multiple letters from the county's legal team had explicitly warned the HOA that removing the container would be illegal. I was called to give a deposition, walking through the entire timeline. The agreement with Tom, the container's arrival, the HOA notices, the back and forth communications, and the eventual removal of the equipment. The county's lawyers asked detailed questions about every interaction with Brenda and the board. Did Mrs. Patterson ever acknowledge that the container held county equipment? One attorney asked. Yes, I told her multiple times. I showed her the documentation. The county's lawyers sent letters explaining it. She knew exactly what it was. And what was her response? She said it didn't matter. That HOA rules didn't have exceptions for government equipment and that everyone had to follow the same guidelines. Did she ever suggest a compromise? Allowing the container to remain for a limited time or placing it in a less visible location? No. Her position was that it had to be removed completely, no exceptions. The prosecution built their case on the argument that Brenda had willfully ignored clear warnings from county authorities and had proceeded with the removal knowing it was illegal, purely to assert HOA power. The defense argued that HOA boards have legitimate authority to enforce community standards and that the situation was a civil dispute that had been wrongly criminalized. Meanwhile, the HOA itself was in chaos. 3 homeowners filed a class action lawsuit against the board, arguing that Brenda's actions had exposed the association to massive liability and damaged property values. Karen Winters resigned as vice president, saying she wanted nothing more to do with the drama. Robert Chen and Linda Martinez also stepped down from the board, leaving only Douglas Freeman, who seemed determined to weather the storm. Emergency HOA meetings were called. I attended one, mostly out of curiosity. The community room was packed with angry homeowners demanding answers. Douglas Freeman tried to maintain order, but people kept shouting over each other. How could the board let this happen? One woman demanded. We're going to be sued into bankruptcy. The HOA insurance won't cover criminal actions, someone else pointed out. If Brenda's convicted, we're all liable for whatever damages come out of this. We need to recall the entire board and start over, another voice called out. Douglas looked exhausted. We're working with our attorneys to minimize the association's liability. Mrs. Patterson acted on her own initiative beyond the scope of board authority when she had the container removed. That's not true, someone shouted. You all voted on it. Karen said the whole board approved the removal. We approved enforcing the violation notice, Douglas said carefully. We did not specifically authorize the physical removal of county property without proper coordination. It was obvious they were trying to distance themselves from Brenda's actions, throwing her under the bus to save the association and themselves. Politics at its finest. The preliminary hearing took place in February. I attended along with Tom Richardson and several other deputies who wanted to show support. Brenda arrived with her lawyer, looking considerably less confident than she had in the HOA office. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Margaret Holloway, listened to both sides present their arguments. The defense tried to argue that the charges should be dismissed because Brenda had been acting in her official capacity, as HOA president, and had genuinely believed she had the authority to enforce community regulations. Judge Holloway was not impressed. The defendant received multiple communications from the county explicitly warning that removal of the container would constitute theft of government property. She proceeded anyway. That demonstrates willful disregard for the law, not good faith enforcement of HOA rules. The case was bound over for trial. As winter turned toward spring, the county completed renovations on their storage facility, and the container was no longer needed at my property anyway. The whole situation had become moot on a practical level, but the legal consequences were far from resolved. Tom Richardson told me over coffee one morning that the department was considering a civil suit against Brenda personally and the HOA for the costs associated with recovering the equipment, the investigation, and the disruption to department operations. "It's not just about the money," Tom said. "It's about sending a message that you can't interfere with law enforcement operations just because you don't like how something looks. How much are they thinking? Between the labor costs, the investigation time, the legal work, and everything else. Probably $70,000 or $80,000. I nearly choked on my coffee. That will bankrupt the HOA. Maybe they should have thought about that before messing with our equipment, Tom said. He sounded less angry than he had in January, but there was still an edge to his voice. You don't get to play games with government property and walk away clean. The trial was scheduled for late April. As it approached, Brenda's attorney began making noise about a plea agreement. The county was willing to consider it, but they wanted her to plead guilty to at least one felony charge and to cooperate fully in the civil recovery efforts. I was at work in my office at the county building when Tom called me in mid-April. "Brenda took a plea deal," he said. "She's pleading guilty to theft of government property, reduced to a fourth-degree felony. She'll get probation, community service, and a permanent criminal record. She also has to cooperate with the civil suit." "What about jail time?" "None, as long as she completes probation successfully." The prosecutor figured a criminal conviction and the financial consequences would be punishment enough. Plus, it saves the cost of a trial. "How do you feel about that?" Tom was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, I think it's fair. She's going to lose a lot of money, she has a felony conviction, and her reputation is destroyed. That seems proportional to what she did. She didn't hurt anyone physically, and everything was recovered. I can live with it." The plea hearing was quick. Brenda stood before Judge Holloway, admitted guilt, and was sentenced to 3 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and ordered to cooperate fully with the civil proceedings. She looked diminished, a far cry from the imperious HOA president who had stood in her office months earlier, insisting that rules were rules. The civil case moved forward separately. The county's lawsuit demanded reimbursement for all costs associated with the incident, which they calculated at $72,000. The HOA's insurance company fought it, but ultimately settled for $55,000, which effectively wiped out the association's reserve fund and required a special assessment on all homeowners. I received angry letters from several neighbors blaming me for the financial hit. One letter suggested I should voluntarily pay the assessment for everyone since this was my fault. I ignored it. The HOA board was completely reconstituted. Douglas Freeman resigned after the settlement, and a group of younger homeowners took over, immediately passing reforms to limit the board's enforcement authority and require member approval for any significant actions against homeowners. Karen Winters, who had cooperated fully with the investigation and prosecution, avoided any charges. She sent me an apology letter in May, saying she should have pushed back harder against Brenda's aggressive approach and that she regretted not speaking up more forcefully. I appreciated the gesture but didn't respond. I was tired of the whole situation and wanted it to end. By summer, life in Pleasant Ridge had mostly returned to normal. Brenda had moved out of the subdivision, unable to face the daily judgment from neighbors. Her house went up for sale in June and sold quickly to a young couple with 2 kids who had no idea about the drama that had taken place. Tom Richardson and I remained friends, though we joked that maybe future favors should be a little less complicated. The sheriff's department added a clause to their temporary storage agreements, requiring explicit written confirmation from any HOA or landlord before placing equipment on residential property. I thought the whole mess was finally behind me until August, when I received a formal letter from the new HOA board. My heart sank when I saw the envelope, expecting more trouble. Instead, it was an apology. The new board president, a software engineer named Rachel Morrison, wrote that the board had reviewed everything that happened and wanted to formally apologize for the previous administration's actions. They acknowledged that I had been treated unfairly, that the seizure of the container had been illegal and wrong, and that the HOA should have worked cooperatively with me and the county from the beginning. Furthermore, the letter informed me that the board had voted to reimburse me for the legal costs I had incurred defending myself, approximately $3,000 in attorney fees and expenses. A check was enclosed. I sat at my kitchen table, reading the letter twice, hardly believing it. An HOA that admitted it was wrong and actually made amends. It felt like finding a unicorn. I called Rachel Morrison to thank her. "We're trying to turn things around," Rachel said. "What happened with Brenda was embarrassing for all of us. We want Pleasant Ridge to be a community where people work together, not a place where petty tyrants make everyone's life miserable." "I appreciate that more than you know," I said. "We're also revising the community guidelines to add a provision allowing temporary placements of government equipment with proper documentation and reasonable time limits. If something like this comes up again, we want to handle it better." "That's really good to hear." "And Marcus, I'm sorry you had to go through all this. You were just trying to help your department and got caught in the middle of a power trip. That shouldn't have happened." After we hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: peace. The nightmare was actually over. The HOA had new leadership. Brenda faced consequences for her actions. The county recovered their equipment without loss, and I had been vindicated. I thought about everything that had happened, from that first notice in my mailbox to watching Brenda being arrested in a storage facility parking lot. It had been exhausting and stressful and expensive, but in the end, the system had worked. Not quickly, not efficiently, but it had worked. The following weekend, I was mowing my lawn when my neighbor across the street, an elderly man named Walter who had lived in Pleasant Ridge since it was built, walked over. "Marcus, got a minute?" he asked. "Sure, Walter. What's up?" "I wanted to tell you something." I didn't speak up during all that mess with Brenda and the container because I'm old and I don't like conflict. But I want you to know I thought what she did was wrong. A lot of us did. We just didn't have the courage to say it publicly. I understand. It was a weird situation for everyone. "No, you don't understand," Walter said firmly. "We should have stood up for you. You were being bullied by the HOA and we all just watched because we didn't want to make waves. That was cowardly. I'm sorry." I was surprised by his directness. "Walter, it's okay. I don't blame anyone for staying out of it." "Well, I blame myself," he said. "So I'm saying it now. You were right. Brenda was wrong and I'm glad she's gone. And if the HOA ever tries anything like that again with anyone, I'll be the first one at the meeting to raise hell about it." "Thank you, Walter. That means a lot." He nodded and walked back to his house, leaving me standing in my half-mowed lawn feeling oddly emotional. That evening, I sat on my back deck with a beer, watching the sun set over the subdivision. The spot in my driveway where the container had sat was just empty asphalt now, no different from the rest of the driveway. You couldn't tell anything had ever been there, but something had changed in Pleasant Ridge. The community had been through a trial, literally and figuratively, and had come out different on the other side. People were more engaged with the HOA, attending meetings and asking questions. The new board was more transparent and collaborative. And there was a general sense that unchecked authority, even at the small-scale level of a homeowners association, could lead to serious consequences. I thought about Brenda sometimes, wondering how she was adjusting to life after Pleasant Ridge. Her felony conviction meant certain jobs and opportunities were closed to her forever. Her reputation was permanently damaged. The financial costs had been enormous. All because she couldn't tolerate a storage container in someone's driveway for a few months, even when it was there for legitimate government purposes. Pride and inflexibility had destroyed her life. It was a harsh lesson, but maybe a necessary one. Tom Richardson stopped by one evening in September with pizza and the news that the department had officially closed the books on the whole incident. "We got our settlement money. All the equipment is accounted for, and the brass is satisfied justice was served," Tom said, grabbing a slice. "They're using the case in training now as an example of how to handle civilian cooperation agreements and what can go wrong." "I'm famous in Sheriff's Department training materials," I said. "That's not exactly how I wanted to be remembered. Could be worse. You could be the cautionary tale about the HOA president who committed a felony over a storage container." We laughed, though it really wasn't funny. It was tragic in a small-scale, suburban kind of way. "You going to help us out with storage in the future if we need it?" Tom asked. "Not a chance," I said immediately. "I'm done being helpful. You guys can figure out your own storage problems." "Fair enough." We ate pizza and watched a football game, not talking about HOAs or storage containers or any of it. Just two friends enjoying a quiet evening, which was exactly what I needed. As fall arrived and the weather cooled, I found myself thinking less about the drama and more about normal things. Work deadlines, family plans, whether to replace my aging car. The storage container incident became a story I told at parties, a bizarre chapter in my life that people found entertaining in retrospect, even though it had been miserable to live through. The Pleasant Ridge HOA continued its transformation. Rachel Morrison and her board instituted quarterly town halls where homeowners could voice concerns and ask questions. They published detailed financial reports and meeting minutes. They established an appeal process for violation notices. Everything Brenda's regime hadn't done. Property values in Pleasant Ridge actually increased slightly, partly because the news coverage, while embarrassing at the time, had raised the subdivision's profile, and partly because the HOA reforms made it a more attractive place to live. Real estate agents marketed Pleasant Ridge as a community that had learned from its mistakes and implemented good governance practices. I received a call in November from a reporter at the Columbus Dispatch who was doing a follow-up story on the incident. She wanted to know how things had changed a year later and whether I felt justice had been served. "Justice is a complicated word," I told her. "But yes, I think the outcome was fair. Someone who abused their authority faced consequences. The community learned from the experience. And reasonable people are in charge now. That's about as good as you can hope for. You have any regrets about how you handled it?" I wish I had fought back harder against the initial violation notices instead of assuming reasonable people would reach a reasonable agreement. But no, I don't regret standing my ground or letting the legal system work. Sometimes you have to draw a line and defend it, even over something that seems minor. What would you tell other homeowners dealing with aggressive HOAs? Document everything. Know your rights. Don't assume the HOA has unlimited authority just because they say they do. And if they're breaking the law, don't be afraid to involve the appropriate authorities. HOAs provide useful services, but they're not above the law, and board members need to remember they're volunteers managing a community, not dictators ruling a fiefdom. The article ran the week before Thanksgiving, featuring photos of me standing in my driveway where the container had been, and a quote from Rachel Morrison about the HOA's reforms. Brenda was mentioned, but declined to comment through her attorney. On Thanksgiving Day, I had dinner with my sister and her family in Pennsylvania, the same place I had been when the container was taken. My brother-in-law brought up the article, having seen it online. "That was quite a year you had," he said. "That's one way to put it." You think Brenda learned anything from all this? I considered the question. I hope so. But some people are so invested in being right that they can't admit when they're wrong, even when it costs them everything. I don't know which kind of person Brenda is. My sister, always the optimist, said, "Maybe this was the wake-up call she needed. Maybe she'll come out of it a better person." Maybe, I agreed, though I wasn't convinced. The truth was, I didn't spend much time thinking about Brenda anymore. She had been a problem. The problem had been resolved, and I had moved on. Holding on to anger or bitterness would only hurt me, not her. December brought the first significant snowfall of the winter, and I found myself outside shoveling my driveway, looking at the spot where all the trouble had started. It was just a driveway again. No container, no drama, no deputies or lawyers or reporters. Just snow and concrete and the quiet stillness of a suburban winter morning. Walter came out to shovel his own driveway and waved at me. Rachel Morrison drove past and honked hello. A new family that had moved in over the summer was building a snowman in their front yard. Life in Pleasant Ridge continued, the community having absorbed and processed its scandal, now moving forward with better systems and hopefully better judgment. I finished shoveling and went inside to warm up with coffee. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom Richardson, asking if I wanted to grab lunch next week. I replied yes, suggesting a new barbecue place that had opened downtown. Ordinary life, ordinary plans, ordinary days. After everything that had happened, ordinary felt like a gift. The storage container incident had taught me several things. I learned that homeowners associations, despite their bland suburban appearance, could wield their limited authority in dangerous and destructive ways if led by the wrong people. I learned that standing up to bureaucratic bullying was exhausting but necessary. I learned that the legal system, while slow and expensive, could ultimately deliver justice when criminal behavior occurred. Most importantly, I learned that communities were resilient. Pleasant Ridge had been through a crisis of leadership and emerged with better governance, more engaged residents, and a renewed commitment to treating people fairly. The scandal could have torn the subdivision apart, but instead it had forced necessary changes. As Christmas approached, the new HOA board organized a community holiday party, the first one in several years. I almost didn't go, still feeling some residual wariness about anything HOA related. But Walter convinced me, saying it was important to show support for the new leadership, and that hiding at home wouldn't help anyone. The party was held in the community center, decorated with lights and a large tree. Probably 200 people showed up, families and singles and elderly couples, all mingling and eating cookies and drinking punch. Rachel Morrison gave a short speech thanking everyone for their patience during the transition year, and promising that the board would continue working hard to make Pleasant Ridge a great place to live. Several people approached me during the evening to say hello and express relief that the whole storage container situation was finally behind us. One woman apologized for sending me an angry letter earlier in the year, saying she had been stressed about the special assessment and had lashed out inappropriately. "It's forgotten," I told her, meaning it. As I drove home that night, past houses decorated with Christmas lights and inflatable Santas, I felt genuinely happy. The subdivision looked beautiful in the winter evening, lights twinkling against the snow, smoke rising from chimneys. It looked like peace. That was exactly what it was. The final chapter of the saga came in January 2026, exactly 1 year after the container had been taken. I received a certified letter from Brenda Patterson's attorney informing me that she had completed her community service requirements and was successfully progressing through her probation period. The letter included a personal note from Brenda herself. "Marcus, I owe you an apology. I let my commitment to rules and order override my common sense and basic decency. I should have worked with you to find a solution instead of treating you like an adversary. My actions were wrong and caused harm to you, the HOA, and the entire community. I have learned a difficult lesson about humility and the limits of authority. I hope you can forgive me, though I understand if you cannot. I wish you well. Brenda Patterson." I read the note several times, looking for any hint of insincerity or resentment, but it seemed genuine. Whether she truly had learned from the experience or was simply saying what her lawyer and probation officer wanted to hear, I couldn't know. But I decided to take it at face value. I wrote a brief response saying I appreciated her apology and hoped she was doing well. I didn't need to be friends with Brenda or even particularly care about her future, but I could afford to be gracious. The anger and frustration I had felt during the worst of the conflict had long since faded, replaced by simple relief that it was over. I mailed the letter, and that was it. The final communication in a saga that had consumed months of my life. Spring came early in 2026, and with it came a request from Tom Richardson that made me laugh out loud. The sheriff's department needed temporary storage space for overflow equipment again. Would I be interested? "Absolutely not," I said. "Find someone else. I'm retired from the storage business. Come on, we'll pay triple what we paid before." "Tom, you could pay me 10 times as much and I wouldn't do it. I've had enough excitement for one lifetime." "Fair enough, can't blame a guy for trying." We both laughed, and I knew the storage container incident had truly become history, something we could joke about without tension or bitterness. I continued my quiet life in Pleasant Ridge. Work remained steady but unexciting, which was exactly how I liked it. The HOA functioned smoothly under its new leadership, enforcing reasonable rules in reasonable ways. My neighbors were friendly. My property stayed comfortably anonymous, just another house on just another street. Sometimes I drove past Miller's storage and thought about that surreal day when half the sheriff's department descended on Unit 47 to recover a stolen container. Sometimes I saw news stories about other HOA disputes around the country and felt grateful that ours had been resolved decisively rather than dragging on for years. Mostly, though, I just lived my life. The storage container was gone, Brenda was gone, the drama was gone. What remained was an ordinary suburban existence in an ordinary subdivision in Franklin County, Ohio, which was exactly what I had wanted all along. The house at 2847 Maple Grove Drive, my house, was again just a house. The driveway was again just a driveway. The HOA was again just a homeowners association doing its job without overreach or abuse. Everything had returned to normal, better than normal actually, because the community had learned important lessons about governance and accountability. Sometimes it takes a crisis to force necessary changes. Pleasant Ridge had its crisis and came through it stronger. As for me, I had learned my own lessons about standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult and expensive and stressful. I had learned that small-scale tyranny was still tyranny and deserved to be challenged. I had learned that friends like Tom Richardson, who stood by you when things got complicated, were worth their weight in gold. On a warm evening in May, I sat on my back deck with a book and a cold drink, listening to kids playing in neighboring yards and birds singing in the trees. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. A gentle breeze carried the scent of someone grilling dinner. It was perfect peace, earned through conflict and maintained through vigilance. My phone buzzed with a reminder about the next HOA meeting, which I had actually added to my calendar. I planned to attend, not because I expected trouble, but because I had learned that community governance required participation from reasonable people. If reasonable people stayed home, unreasonable people filled the void. I wouldn't let that happen again. The storage container incident was over, but its lessons remained. I carried them with me. A strange education in HOA politics, property law, and the importance of standing your ground when powerful people, even those with very limited power, tried to push you around. As darkness fell over Pleasant Ridge, lights came on in houses up and down the street, families settling in for the evening. Everything was as it should be, quiet and ordinary and blessedly drama-free. I raised my glass to the empty driveway, to the container that was no longer there, to the whole ridiculous episode that had somehow become a defining experience. Then I went inside, locked my door, and got on with my life.